Hey everybody, Joseph Rothschild here, aka MBT, and new Maxi PogChamp, new Maxi PogChamp. Okay, so this one might be a problem. In case you're not subscribed to Jesse Cotton, earlier today Konami revealed a new card that's coming out in Rhoda. The name of the set is Rhoda, called Multi-Charmy Fuwa Ross. This is of course the result of that one VTuber and Ross from Friends doing the fusion dance. This more petable version of Multi-Charmy Perulia forecasts a very dire possibility for the future of Yu-Gi-Oh! We're gonna get one of these assholes every 6 months until the sun explodes. This is the second in a series of monsters called Multi-Charmies, which appear to be different takes at fixing one of Yu-Gi-Oh's most powerful cards of all time, Maxx. This frustrating little earth insect, which draws a card each time your opponent special summons, has been playable in pretty much every deck pretty much since release. And while we are thankfully rid of it in the TCG, we are kind of missing its effect in a historically going first meta. A card that gives players options when their opponents are comboing off is sorely needed in Yu-Gi-Oh!, but Maxx certainly isn't it. So it's not really a surprise that these monsters, who in my opinion largely resemble community efforts to fix or errata Maxx, have been leaking out of Konami's servers set by set for the last couple of releases. Now, we spoke at length about Multi-Charmy Perulia about 3 months ago, but now I guess it's time to take a look at this second one, and spoiler alert, it's a lot better. Before we start calling this card better or even comparable to Maxx, however, let's look back just a little bit and see if we were right or wrong about the last Multi-Charmy monster. So if you've been around Yu-Gi-Oh! YouTube for the last couple of months, you probably know that Multi-Charmy Perulia was one of the most hotly contested cards at time of release. Was it going to be as dominant as Maxx? Was it even going to be played? These questions and more were not really answered by the OCG. This card is going to be legal in the TCG in about a week and a half, and in the OCG it's already been legal for a couple of months. So, did they play it? Well, not really, no. In my video, I forecasted that Multi-Charmy Perulia would see consistent play in the sideboard exclusively, and only during metagames in which it made sense. Sideboard space is extremely valuable. Usually a card that sits there is going to have applications in more than one matchup if it's going to live there at all. And Multi-Charmy Perulia is written in such a way that it's only good going second. There's not really a scenario in which you would want to board into these going first. So a card that only sees play 33% of the time, and even then only in matchups where it excels, is kind of a tough sell. That said, the effect is really good, and when it's good, it is very strong. So why didn't anyone play with it in the OCG? Well, 3 reasons. Firstly, why play discount Maxx? They have Maxx. Secondly, and I know I'm going to get a lot of hate for this one, there just aren't as many sideboarded tournaments in the OCG as there are in the TCG. A significant amount of locals and even premier level events are played in best of 1, and this card is not good at all in best of 1. And finally, and in my opinion most importantly, remember that I said that this card is only going to be played in metagames that are kind to it? Well, in the previous video, I talked a lot about use cases for this card and how it stacks up against a lot of the top decks, but since that video's come out, there's now basically one top deck. At present, Snake-Eye Fiendsmith is kind of the only thing worth playing. Pretty much every deck that's worth playing right now includes a card called the Fiendsmith, which you're all going to be very familiar with very shortly. And unfortunately, this card is a fantastic way to play around Multi-Charmy Perulia. Yes, sometimes you're going to fire Multi-Charmy Perulia, and your opponent's going to go Diabellstar Ash Poplar, netting you 3 cards, which is crazy. But nowadays, it's just as likely that they're going to go Perulia. Okay, I'm going to activate the effect of the Fiendsmith to get Tractus. And then you draw nothing. The card's still really good against Yubel, and it's got a lot of applications against some other decks that are around to the periphery of the format, but we're going to have to see how it turns out this weekend at the NAWCQ. I know a great number of people who are not going to be playing it. But I don't think that's going to be the case for this second one, and let me explain to you why. Firstly, just like last time, let's read the card proper. Multi-Charmy Fuwa Ross is a level 4 Winged Beast effect monster, Robina target! And just like Peluria, you can only activate one of their Multi-Charmy monster effect the turn you activate this effect. This seems to be a running theme. You're only expected to play 2 of these cards over the course of a singular turn, but of course it isn't a hard once per turn, so it could just be it twice. If you control no cards, as a quick effect, you can discard this card, apply these effects this turn. Just like last time, this is to box out that extremely feels bad moment when your opponent sets up full combo, including an Omni Negate, and then fires Maxx and draw step. Each time your opponent special summons a monster from the deck or extra deck, immediately draw 1 card. And once during the end phase, if the number of cards in your hand is more than the number of cards your opponent controls plus 6, you must randomly shuffle cards from your hand into the deck, so the number in your hand equals the number your opponent controls plus 6. So let's talk about this. Special summoning cards from your hand is really good, and a lot of decks do that frequently. That's why Perulia is in the conversation at all. But there's also a lot of decks that don't, And more importantly, there's a lot of decks that do not care at all. The same can't be said for Mulcharmy Fu or Ross. Over the last 15 years, the extra deck has radically transformed from a location you would put extremely powerful cards that you would get out with cards like Polymerization and Metamorphosis, to a location where powerful boss monsters and toolbox effects lived during Synchro and Xyz formats, to finally just 15 combo starters. Just 15 combo starters in a pile. You start your game with a 20 card hand and 15 of them are in your extra. I struggle to think of a singular deck that doesn't go into the extra multiple times over the course of its setup combo. Maybe like Kashtira? I mean, Tenpai does, but maybe they don't care because they're just going to kill you. Where I was forecasting Perulia might be pretty powerful because against a Fire King Snake Eye player with one Garnet at hand, it could draw you 4 or 5 cards. Against a Snake Eye player that chooses to commit, this card will draw you 11. In fact, this card seems not only more in tune with the way that combo decks function in the modern day and age, but also maybe a specific answer to one of the most frustrating combos that's been tearing up the OCG for the last couple of months in Fiendsmith. Fiendsmith usually has to go into Closed Heaven, they have to go into Requiem, they have to go into the 2, they have to go into Lacrimosa, they have to go into Dies Irae, and ideally they'd like to go for stuff like Beatrice and Apollosa and Wave High King Caesar and the like. Suddenly this splashable side engine is a huge liability, because if your opponent activates this card, your extra deck is full of combo enablers for that line specifically, and they're gonna draw 9. Against some of the other top decks, Yubel of course is going to trigger this like double digits of times. Remember like 2 weeks ago when people were frustrated that Phantom of Yubel was a fusion summon from nowhere using nothing? It just happens. Well, now just happening nets your opponent some advantage. Tenpai probably doesn't care. Even if you force them into going first, they're going to make a Seals, draw you 1 card and pass, or just let you play with a 4-card hand. I mean, they're more than capable of beating that. Even decks that don't extra deck combo, like Rescue Ace, are going to have a little bit of a problem with this because they do put links on their side of the field as a mechanism to get cards from their field into the graveyard. And this is to speak nothing of the fact that it also draws if a monster is summoned from the deck. Even decks that theoretically have the ability to play around the extra deck lock are going to be using cards that take cards from their deck and put them onto the field. Kashtira Theosis, Spiritual Beast Tamer Lara. Hell, Tour Guide triggers this. The short of it is, this card is going to be really good. Where I expected Perulia would see consistent sideboard play in a meta that was favorable to it, I am having a hard time thinking of a meta that would not be favorable to this card. Like Perulia, I think if this card draws you 2, it's unbelievably strong, and if it draws you 3, it is bannably good. And I struggle to think of a deck that doesn't at least drastically decrease the strength of their end board in order to convert this into an upstart goblin at worst. While we were able to kind of gloss over it with the Perulia video, because this card is so good, we are going to have to talk about this end phase trigger. I kind of garbled my words in that last video, so I'm going to take another shot at it again. If during the end phase, the number of cards in your hand is more than the number of cards your opponent controls plus 6, you shuffle down to the number your opponent controls plus 6. If they link their whole board away for an Apollosa and end on 1 card to your 7-card hand, you're fine. I think early on a lot of people are going to decide to take the challenge because, hey, they're going to shuffle down at the end of the turn, why not go all in? Well, let me explain to you why maybe you wouldn't want to go all in. Firstly, minimum 7 is a lot of cards. Even if you control nothing on your board, your opponent is going to begin with 6 cards in hand and then draw for turn. That's Magic the Gathering numbers. We can't deal with that. All it's going to take is some number of play starters, some number of extenders, and some number of defensive cards designed to make their plays work to shut you out of the game completely. Because of this, it feels like it makes sense to go all in. Put your opponent on gotta have it in a 14 or 15 card hand. The problem there is that they're going to have it. As Omni-Negates like Borreload, Savage Dragon, and Baron have been surgically removed from Yu-Gi-Oh!, there are less answers to cards that equalize board states. And if your opponent knows they're going second, the only scenario in which they're going to be boarding into this card, they probably got like evenly matched, or like Tactics, or like Regeki. Additionally, and we talked about this a little bit in the previous video, there are going to be a lot of scenarios where you go all in and still can't trigger this end phase shuffle down. That's because a significant amount of the cards your opponent draws are going to be immediately activatable. This first effect doesn't say you can only activate multi-charmy monsters. It says you can activate 1 additional multi-charmy monster. You're still free to fire Ash or Imperm or that new trap that's sort of Ash and sort of Imperm all over the turn. Hell, you can fire a second Fu or Ross. There's no once per turn on this thing. The end result is that your setup turn is going to stumble. You will put up a less impressive board and fewer cards on it, as your opponent expends individual cards in their hand, both to avoid this end phase trigger and to prevent you from mounting an offense. In short, I think there are a lot of good arguments on both sides about Perulia's playability. There are metagames, like the one we're living in now, that are unfriendly enough to the card that it's not necessarily super strong, and the best case scenario for the Jellyfish is that it occupies 3 spaces in the sideboard and never takes over the game. I think such arguments absolutely dissolve in the face of this card. Given the reality realities of modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck design, it's hard for me to imagine a metagame or even a mechanism to play around this effect. It does seem game-winningly powerful, and even if it takes over the game and goes all the way off, the downside is really a cold comfort to an opponent who is about to lose. But, and this is where the video is going to get a little contentious, that might be alright. We've known for a long time that Yu-Gi-Oh! Has a going first problem. Winning the die roll is so important that many players feel that they're shut out of the game as soon as they hit those snake eyes. Not the deck, the pips on a couple of dies. This is one of the most powerful mechanisms yet at giving the going second player the tools to still be in a game where one player is functionally unimpeded. And thankfully, unlike Maxx, there's a significant amount of awful, feels bad situations that it absolutely still does a good job at boxing out. I think a lot of the frustration of this card is going to be alleviated as players find ways to adapt. Theoretically, invent boards that can play through this card in ways that you just couldn't versus Maxx, because, I mean, what the hell are you going to do? Not play the game? As much as I made fun of this guy on Twitter, I think it will lead to the rise of main deckable cards, or at least side deckable going first cards that do not trigger this effect and do constitute a threat even in a world where you're forced to functionally just pass. Think Fenrir and the like. And finally, maybe it'll actually get them to ban Maxx. This card can't exist at the same time as the insect. Come on. That's it. See ya.